Kyle Israel. Welcome to the podcast, man. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Thanks for having me, Dom. I'm hoping that I bring everything that you expect today, because I am candidly a tiny bit jet lagged flying over from Berlin to Central Florida yesterday. But no place I'd rather be than here with you right now.
No, you're the man, and I appreciate you being really the first guest on a hopefully what ends up being quite the continued stacked roster of folks joining us to really explore um, not just the future of the asset class and sports as a whole, but more specifically the marketing, storytelling, and really inspiration around it all. I couldn't think of a better guy to start it off with. To give people a little bit of context, right? You're currently the managing partner of Momentous Sports. You're an advisor to Athletiverse and a dear friend and really family to me, anyways. But you see the sports landscape, I think, from a really unique perspective. Also being a serial entrepreneur, but I would love if you could kind of just summarize yourself and how you're processing the world and the asset class today as it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, First of all, extremely excited to be an advisor for Athletiverse and the fantastic work that you all are doing, and excited to talk about marketing in the asset class today. A brief background on myself. I think the earliest starting point that makes sense generally for this discussion is with former athlete. Was very fortunate to have a chance to be the starting quarterback at UCF here in Orlando, my hometown, back in the early 2000s. Played a little bit of professional or semi-professional football, whatever you'd like to call it, American football, overseas across Europe and in Germany, Poland, and Russia in my early 20s. And then, to your point, I've been an entrepreneur for the last 20 years. Started that early and cut my teeth in business in the hospitality space with some independent concepts. Learned a lot about managing people and leading people in a business context there. Kind of matured that into a master franchisee opportunity, building out markets for fast casual restaurant concepts. And then about 8 years ago, took a hard pivot into more of the startup space, where I co-founded a company in at the intersection of sports and health tech called Mestry, which was really focused. Early days was just focused on helping athletes transition out of sport and into the next phase of their careers. That's at least what brought me to the table, and where I saw some challenges as I was mentoring student athletes that were graduating from university. Ultimately started to focus more on cognitive performance and thinking of the muscle as a brain, or the brain as a muscle, excuse me, through the science of neuroplasticity. And so obviously that was a different maturation process from a business perspective, and going out and really raising venture capital for the first time from venture funds, understanding the fundraising process, building a tech neuroscience product, right before COVID and through COVID was a unique and interesting experience, and ultimately built a lot of relationships in sports from that led me to the family office that I'm now a part of with Magnolia Hill Partners, as they were our largest investor. And so 3 years ago, our chairman started to see that there was sports deal flow crossing the desk. We were, at the time I was transitioning to move to Berlin and be with my family and start my family there with my fiance. And they said, "Hey, Kyle, can you come in and bring that entrepreneurial strategist, operator perspective, to our team to help us look at sports and identify, is this something we want to invest in and be a part of? Is it an asset class? And if so, how do we want to do that?" So long story short, and we'll get into various elements of that, I'm sure, Magnolia Hill Partners decided last September, with the support of Athletiverse, to launch Momentous publicly. Momentous is basically a culmination of 2.5 years or 3 years of work, where we identified for us that in the middle market of sports in particular, so in the US, USL, NWSL, WNBA, and a handful of other types of leagues in sports, there's a huge focus on infrastructure development, stadium development, mixed use real estate development around those stadiums. And as a family office, we started to identify, like, hey, we understand that side of the business really well. We've got pretty good at underwriting sports properties, but we really can add horsepower and support to teams, to clubs who are looking to develop stadiums and put the capital together and the plans and the master development plans together to develop these mixed use real estate projects and participate, with capital on both sides of that, into the team and into the real estate. So certainly sort of what I would call a Forrest Gump journey of a career so far, but a bunch of really unique, interesting things that kind of, brought me to where I am today in a way that I could have never planned. And then ultimately led me to a relationship and friendship with you, because I saw what you were doing on socials and how you were starting to talk about the asset class of sports. And I DM'd you right last April and said, "Dude, you're doing some incredible stuff. I love how your brain works. Let's just connect." And I guess here in March of 26, we're having this discussion right now. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. Father of two, got two little kids under the age of 3.5, live in Berlin, Germany most of the time, and and love this asset class. Feel very, very fortunate to know that I'm going to spend hopefully the rest of my career in a place that asset class that's just so exciting to be a part of.
Incredible, man. Thank you for that rundown. I've heard that about 10 times from you, but it's special every time. Like there's always some little element that you lean into that I'm like, oh, I always forget that. But yeah, we met through very much through content and social media, and it really I think goes to show you how really this black box of an algorithm these days that we're all dealing with somehow gets the right message to the right people. And in regards to that, when you were thinking of launching Momentous with Blair and Marley and team, what you're talking about is, I'll be honest, from the everyday sports fan, it's pretty boring stuff in the sense that it's real estate, it's very institutional. Why did you guys feel it to be of importance to have a content approach around participating in the sports asset class?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think there's a couple reasons for that. Number one, just generally as a family office, you're typically very much to an extent behind a curtain, right? Not super public, not putting a lot of your thoughts and how you think about the world out there for people to consume. And as we launched a platform that was going to bring in additional capital from outside sources, not just be our balance sheet capital as a family office, there's a marketing function that has to be a part of that, right? And getting the news out. And you guys helped us do that. In a way that I think was extremely successful. In addition to that, as it relates to our portfolio, both now and in the future, we recognized that we needed to be as knowledgeable as possible and aware of all the trends, all the technology, everything that's happening that is going to impact the sports asset class as a whole. We had the institutional knowledge and built into our team around the real estate, but outside of just the marketing efforts for Momentous and our goals there, we also needed to ensure that in the future, our sports properties and assets were thinking the right way about how they're deploying the marketing efforts that they're deploying. And so going down that rabbit hole, getting into the weeds and understanding what the future of brands, marketing, media, what all that means was really critical, I think, to our overall thesis. And when you think about it, people think about the mixed use real estate piece and like hotels, apartments, F&B, hospitality, but there's marketing functions in all of that, right? And that is an ecosystem that relies on your ability to tell a story ultimately for the success. So it's the real estate, the marketing, it all blends together, and it's all part of the system that makes a great, fantastic sports property. And so it was important for all those various reasons.
I think to that regard, the one thing that I admire tremendously from you, the Momentous team, and the world in which you operate and see things is that you look at something like marketing, you look at content, you look at social, and really you see it as a vehicle, an asset for not just your message, but commerce in general. And when you look at teams and certainly not just those that are in your portfolio and will be in the future, but I think to our audience's knowledge and credit, you've seen probably 200-300 plus deals pass your desk over the last year. Why do you think at a local level, teams and especially owners and new owners in the asset class consider to process marketing and social media as more of a cost center rather than a revenue center, at least from the standpoint of not seeing it as this asset that they can really grow and operate on in a multitude of ways?
Well, I don't think that, the simple answer to that is I'm not sure that they understand how to look at it as a revenue stream or something that's additive, right? Like there's just a pure educational baseline of going like, how do we monetize it? It is typically a cost center, right? It is something that they feel like they have to do to stay relevant. So, I think that's one of just like the baseline reasons. Now, when you talk to teams that are more sophisticated in a sense of their ability to process where trends are going and how things are moving, you start to see owners, operators think about like, what are all the revenue categories that we can access that we don't or can't access today? And, a part of that is attention, right? And social attention and those types of elements. So I think when they hear that there is opportunity to think about social in a much different way, every owner is basically game to go down that rabbit hole and figure out like, what do you mean? Because when I'm underwriting an opportunity and I'm looking at the kind of typical key revenue categories, right? Ticket sales, sponsorships and partnerships, premium seating, Obviously, media rights. Now that's less applicable across the middle market of sports until you get over into Europe, where they have more meaningful media rights and television packages kind of in that middle layer. Um, but these teams and clubs and owners are saying, okay, well, where else can revenue be driven from? What assets do we have that we can monetize? And so I think when they have the base layer of education that doesn't help them think through the lens of like, how do we leverage social? They're just leaving something on the table. So I recognized over time, like, okay, we've got to figure out more ways to generate revenue from these clubs in a holistic, sustainable way. For us, we're ultimately thinking about, top line revenue and returns. And I think social is a fantastic way to do that, or so I've learned. But just the same way I've had to learn how that's potentially possible, most owners today are still behind that learning curve.
Credit to why we're even trying to have this conversation, right? Is to bring more certainly awareness to it. What, from a content perspective, and you've looked at a lot of properties. You've seen properties that are, from a marketing collateral standpoint, putting out really, really good things. You've seen out teams that are putting out really bad things. What typically goes into the teams that are doing a great job, right? Is it talent retention? Is it having a single person in the room that really understands and knows what they're doing? How are you processing that as you're thinking about, over time as this portfolio expands, you come to sort of plug and play the winning playbook across the board?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I don't know that there's one distinct answer to that, but there's a couple of examples that come to mind just generally. First and foremost, I think whoever's in the control position and really leading the efforts in an organization, typically the ones that are doing it well, like inherently understand the value of showing up in the market the right way, right? And telling a story. These are community assets. These are assets that need to have stories told about them. And I think it starts with ownership, leadership, or management. Somebody there saying like, this is a huge priority and should be a huge priority for us. And the ones that are doing that successfully have taken advantage of that. I'll speak to the middle market for a second here as it relates to inside the organization. Athletes that are playing in the USL today, or the Gamebridge Super League, or some of these other middle layer sports, like they're kind of always thinking about, or in an ideal world, they're going to the next level, to the big show, right? And one thing that constantly doesn't concern me, but I pay attention to within each sports property is the team, the continuity between, the not the team on the pitch or the field or the court, but the team that's actually running the business. And just like the athletes are looking to make that progression to the next level, so are typically the people working in the front offices of these sports properties. And that creates over time a continuity issue inside of the organization. One person has this strategy, they're very good. They've taken advantage of the opportunity that was presented, and now they're gone from a USL club to an MLS club. And you're starting all over from scratch inside the organization going, wait, what were they doing? How were we doing that the right way? How do we continue that or turn that back on or whatever? And so, the teams that have done it well have, number one, figured out a way to build continuity into the organization so that if somebody steps out, the system keeps going, right? And I've seen that, cross a couple different properties. And typically those teams that have figured out the system to stay in place are some of the better revenue generating organizations in the league, from ticket sales and elsewhere. You've seen that kind of revenue continuity continue. So number one, it's got to be a priority. Number two, you've got to have continuity, both short-term, midterm, and long-term, in a system for your overall organization, not just led by an individual and a specific skill set. And then number three, it's one thing to be like, I know social is important, and then to say like, and this is how we do it, but understanding how to take what's working and do more of that. And then how do you figure out what's working? So the people that know what works for them, that can continue to double down on that as a part of their system, I think also, really comes to the surface when you're looking at groups that are doing it the right way. And, it's different between legacy assets, expansion teams. The strategy has to be a little bit different. One thing, you're continuing to grow within a community. Another one, on an expansion franchise, you're trying to get the community's attention for the first time. And so it's much more nuanced than I think people think when they think of social. They just think it's social. We post, we've done our job. People can look at it if they want. But from an investor perspective and from an operator perspective, you're trying to think about every department in your organization doing as much for the growth of that organization as possible. And if social is not a part of that plan, it's hard for me to get excited from an investment perspective in that property.
Oh, there's so many segues in that. But focusing on the middle market, because I think to your point, that's typically where the most turnover happens. It's also where I like to think the most innovation is possible in a lot of these organizations and teams. One of the things that I notice, whether it's customers of Athletiverse or prospects that we're speaking to, that we have relationships with, is that when you look at properties like, Unrivaled Basketball, for example, and they've done a tremendous, tremendous job, and it's awesome that we've gotten a first class seat to it, in terms of how they are pricing and moving digital inventory across their sponsorship. When I look at kind of the middle market of sports, it seems to be really quite honestly, just a miss, I think, across the board in terms of sponsorship on content. You don't really see any sort of recurring pieces that are tied to a specific brand, etc. And most of the time when I'm speaking to, the sponsorship and sales teams at some of these middle market players, they're trying to pitch. Literally, I had a guy the other day say that he's got a $300,000 RFP out to Boeing to be a jersey sponsor of the team and also, do some content with them. And he hasn't heard back. Go figure, right? Why do you think the middle market of sports has had such a challenge getting local business to be, one, just a partner in the team per se, but also buy into what they're doing from a content standpoint? Like, it's very rare where I see, and to give you really good context here, right? The PGA Tour does like a hot round with Chipotle, where they'll post like a graphic, and it's like in the form of like a Chipotle burrito, and they're giving you a BOGO if somebody, birdies 3 holes in a row. Unrivaled Basketball is going to do their Miller Lite Player of the Game every single night. I guess, why is the middle market struggling to do that with smaller businesses in their local markets?
I think it starts because they don't know they should be. Like, I think that's like the easiest answer. I'll do my best to elaborate here, but generally speaking, I think that's at the core. I think it also comes down to the ability to know how to sell it is also a big piece of it. These larger organizations, let's think the big 4 or 5 sports leagues kind of here for a second, like, there's relationships there. There's already a ton of global, domestic or global attention. They typically have the local affiliates behind them as well. People are coming to them rather than them having to go out to the market. Typically, when you start to get down to the middle market of sports at a local level, I think there's a number of dynamics. So let's use some examples here. New Mexico United in the USL, for your listeners, I think is one of the cooler teams to go look at from what they do on socials. They do an incredible job, but they don't have much competition in Albuquerque, New Mexico from a sponsorship perspective, right? You've got the University of New Mexico, there's a AAA baseball team, and there's really nothing else. So in that market, it's a little bit easier for them to get the word out because there's not a lot of other noise out there, and there's not, 4 other professional sports franchises breathing down the neck of the few local sponsors that may exist that could write meaningful checks. So I think market size and positioning is just a built-in element of that. And when you think about, I'll just use an example in market, and I don't know any background here, but if you think about like the Tampa Bay Rowdies, for example, right, in the USL as well, for them to get a local sponsor, this is an assumption. I'm not under NDA. I don't know. I've never underwritten the Rowdies or anything like that. Just used in the market. Like, they've got the Bucks, the Lightning, the Rays, the women's team. They've got a lot more competition to draw sponsorship interest than New Mexico United has. So I think those are inherent just market dynamics that are built into this equation. And then lastly, what's at the core of selling something? At the core of selling something is understanding what the counterparty actually is looking for and needs, not what you want to push on them. And so I think really, starting there and understanding in our market today, who out there needs what we're able to provide, whether it's the type of audience or eyeballs that we're going to draw, et cetera. What is it that is going to move the needle for them? I'm not sure everybody asks that question before they go out and try to sell sponsorship. I think there's an inherent built-in human element where it's like, well, we're a sports franchise and people love sports. And so people are naturally going to want to advertise with us, but that's just not how business works. They want to know, how many people are you reaching? What are the creative and unique ways that you can market our brand? How can you help us create various calls to action, et cetera? So I don't know if that answers your question precisely, but I think there's, inherent market dynamics. I think, the team owner needs to understand the value of it to help push that initiative. And then I do think that, storytelling and having a real strategy, both short term, mid term, and long term, that you can tell the sponsor that you're pursuing, like, hey, this is the strategy. This is how it works. You're going to be able to see the value that we're bringing you, like, is also critical. And not everybody understands how to put that framing together.
What makes you get up every day as an owner or shareholder in these teams and think, yeah, these are the one or two things from a marketing standpoint we need strategic guidance on that the rest of the market needs, right? So where I'm digesting it, thinking, I know for a fact that these teams, they're for the most part pretty uneducated and the sense of understanding the business model and mechanics of this. I have to find a way to create something that's scalable, right? That you could fit it in a box and they can open it and it gives them this sort of roadmap. So with that, being said, what are those one or two things from a strategy perspective we can offer that's extremely helpful and moves the needle for these teams?
Yeah, a good question. I think number one, it kind of goes back to what I mentioned before, the continuity layer, right? And, for me, when I think about, what Athletiverse could provide to an organization, it's a built-in, evergreen, ongoing strategy that, despite the people that are managing that strategy, like, that is going to keep going. Like, what does that look like? So for me, it's, how do we help somebody? I'll give an example. There's teams out in the market right now who are starting to realize, okay, we should be thinking about, social as a revenue generating area of our business rather than a cost center of our business. So from an Athletiverse perspective, and knowing what, you've built and the team has built, Dom, um, you know, we want to ensure that there's an ability to, number one, understand how to present sponsors on an ongoing basis in the right way, leveraging social channels and the multitude of social channels that you can do that on. So how do we ensure that any sponsor or partner that a team or organization is going to engage with, both now and in the future, is going to have a place for a strategy to be built that will then remain in place on an ongoing basis and moving forward into the future. I think that is one thing that, sports organizations have a hard time making. Like, this is the decision and the direction we're going to go in, because there's a lot of just novelty and gray area and not really sure if this is something that works. So, the long-term continuity of the organization itself, the ability to then say, hey guys, it's not just stadium naming rights. It's not just front of jersey sponsor. It's not just billboards or digital signage on the side of the court or the pitch, but you can also, reimagine how you can repurpose your social platform into a revenue source for your organization by putting sponsors and partners there, and then building really specific strategies around how you execute that. So continuity, education then around the value of social in the sponsorship partnership world, and then the ongoing systemized way of executing that moving forward is what I think Athletiverse is on the cusp of doing in an extremely meaningful way that not only supports what we've been talking about, the middle market of sports, but, in the Premier League, in the championship over in England, in La Liga, in Italy, and even across, various properties in the Big Five. Not all of them, or most of them, aren't also thinking about monetizing their social channels in the way that it can be done. And if you think about it at that level, there's a lot of value just sitting out there that's just kind of moving through the ether of time, digitally, and just, it's a nice to have. I know it's cute, but that can be a massive revenue source for the organization. So having a way to do that, which Athletiverse has built, is game changing.
Very, very cool. No, that's exactly what I was.
Is that where we were going? Yeah. Okay.
That's exactly what I was looking for. Yeah. Yeah. Because I, from my perspective, and that's why I asked the question, I have no idea, right? I'm trying. It's hard because at some point you can't see, what is it? The forest through the trees, I think is the saying, but I see the solution. I know what these people need, but again, it's very conversation specific, right? I have to talk to someone and understand where their team's at, blah, blah, blah. You just distilled down for myself and everyone else that hears this, right? Like, no, look, continuity, humongous, right? Where are we going? What is the inspiration behind what it is we're doing here? And if we don't know that, that's not going to matriculate down to the sponsors and people we're trying to convince to support these charades, right? And then the ongoing education is exactly what we're trying to do here, right? Which is, you have to be a resource in market, consistently showing up giving away tremendous, I think, amounts of value, free value that can continue to just spark these sort of conversations. So that was fantastic. You'd mentioned in there some of the bigger, power fives that are still, whether it's throwing stuff out a wall or just by the nature of how big they are, they can just operate sort of in an old school fashion. But thinking about content, for example, and sponsorship on it, do you think there is a world sooner rather than later where we see multimedia rights, MMR groups that have been made popular at the college level, whether it's your Learfields, your Playflies, your JMIs, begin to look at content at both that level, the college level, but also the professional market as a true blue ocean opportunity. And what I mean by that, and we've talked about it even at Athletiverse, right, where we're compiling all this data and all these localized markets. And I have a conversation with an owner next week about doing this in Vegas, where we actually go, okay, you know what? We're going to go sell this content now on your behalf because we have the inventory on you, and we'll just take a revenue share, which, thus in the future could lead us to saying, hey, Kyle, Sporting Jacks, whoever, here's $100,000 up front for us to have your content rights for the next 3 years. Do you think that is a world that makes sense, that could happen relatively sooner rather than later?
Yeah, it's interesting because when you talk about in the way that you're discussing this and thinking about this through the lens of Athletiverse, when you say, hey, I'm going to write you a check up front, we're going to get 3 rights, 3 years, kind of access to the content that you're putting out there, or to the rights of that starts, if it's framed the right way and if it's done the right way with the right intention, then that starts to become a very powerful level, because a lot of these, sports franchises at that level, we'll go back to the middle market, like are quite strapped from a capital perspective. And if there's an organization that they trust that can provide them some liquidity and capital to do some of the things that they need to continue to run their organization, but is also doing that in a very holistic, assured, intentional way, that's going to drive value in other parts of their organization that they can't see today outside of just receiving a check, I think it can be something that's massively leveraged and very interesting to ponder, where you can kind of move away from the negative connotation around that you've sensed to some degree with the organizations you mentioned, and say, hey, we're going to do something that is, I won't use the word similar, but through the same line of thought, but the execution of it on the backside is going to be looking completely different. There's going to be other layers of value that will come to the surface from that. And ultimately, having that being focused on social specifically, I think is a huge differentiator away from the kind of the traditional multimedia rights that have existed in the past.
I think people just are it's just so important that the folks that are underwriting, that people know that those that are underwriting their deals are beginning to think and see these things, right?
Yeah.
They're not ignoring them, right? That is the key to all of it.
If I can add to what I was answering there, also what's really meaningful, why did people go to those agreements in the first place? Because they had guaranteed kind of cash that they knew no matter what they could use. If Learfield or the like could go out and really drive sponsorships and partnerships and profit from that, like, great, that's their business model. But for the sports organization to say, okay, there's continuity and we know that there's going to be a certain check that's coming in no matter what, we can build a budget around it, we can operate off of that, fine. Maybe there were some executives or ADs that are going, what do you mean? I can go get way more money from the market. But inherently it just became easier. And I do think, to your point, how that applies to Athletiverse, I was talking to Warren Smith on a podcast that I hosted recently, and the founding of teams and what he learned from that. And in the very early days for him, it was like outsource it all, keep your core team to build this thing, but go find a partner to do X, Y, or Z. And I think that still persists and exists. And Warren is using that strategy, as I understand it, in teams that he's launching today. So it is the desired inherent kind of element that sports operators, no matter collegiate or professional, are looking for. But I do think, to your point, there's an evolution to how that can be done the right way and in a more effective way.
But yeah, I'm with you. And I think the fun with AI and where technology is now going in the space is you being able to look at how these, outsourced groups that have done an incredibly great job in their area of, competency executing for you can now either be fully integrated into your team without additional overhead and just call it friction through AI, through other technology that can kind of pick up these systems. So That's really cool. I can't let us end, Kyle, without tapping into Europe a little bit, just because of the time you spend there. Your family's obviously based out there. Um, in your opinion, who does content better? Is it Europe or the U.S. in regards to sports teams in general? Like, what teams do you see doing or making the best content? Are they over in Europe or are they in the U.S.?
No, it's absolutely US based organizations and professional sports franchises today. And I think, listen, sports are copycat, right? All the way down from the plays being run on the field, to strategies being deployed elsewhere. And in America, everybody's got a front row seat to one another. And so, the ones that are doing it right, like it proliferates and you just see it organically move across the ecosystem in a more meaningful way as a trend. I think Europe is in general now, Europe is massively nuanced, right? So basically each country, has its own system and then there's layers and leagues and levels to all of that, which impacts this entire thing consideration. And I think Europe is just generally behind in every element when you look at a deal. Like I don't want to make a broad statement there and say that's the case, but let's call it the case for 9 out of 10 clubs, right? There is a ton of uplift that can take place inside of a sports organization typically, and these are organizations that have been around for hundreds of years or 100 years, right? So they have incredible legacy. They have incredible inherently built-in support because it's a religion for people. It's in people's blood. And I think they've just leaned on that and they've just taken that for granted. And where sports are going, where attention is going, how a Gen Z is thinking compared to a millennial, compared to somebody completely different, how they consume media completely different. America's doing a very good job of trying to think around the corner there. I think that Europe is getting out of breaking out of the rust per se of how the organization operates generally. And then from a media content social perspective, I think they're inherently still behind. I think they're now recognizing two things relevant to this conversation, or the two people in this conversation. Number one, I just got off the call before we did this podcast with an ambassador for the UK who focuses on bringing US capital to invest in English football, right? They recognize that bringing more Americans in the right way will overall enhance what the sports properties look like in the future. So that's one element. Two, so there's the government recognizes that in the UK now. Two, on the other side is real estate and infrastructure. Cool to momentous. Like they also are now seeing, because of what's happened in the US and because of these huge projects that are taking place and what they do for communities, they're now saying like, okay, how should we think about our community planning, our live, work, play experience for the citizens in our communities? Like America's doing something that's pretty interesting and people actually really like it. And, these pitches and these stadiums are more challenging because they're boxed into communities, again, that have existed for hundreds of years. It's not like we just purchased in Jacksonville, Florida, 300 plus acres for Sporting Jack. Like, where do you find that in Europe? There's not a lot of places. But I think there's an unbelievable opportunity generally in sports in Europe over the next decade or so, where there's going to be more sophistication, there's going to be more capital, there's going to be more of an adoption of technology and AI, and ultimately, if you look at the balance sheets of clubs in Europe, a majority of teams in soccer in particular are losing money. At the end of the day, they're losing money, and everybody's going, how can we think about different revenue streams for the future? Infrastructure, real estate, and as it applies to this conversation, I can reach out to sponsors and partners and sell social. Okay, that's a new revenue stream that's coming online that's not just a cost center. So definitely ahead in the US. And let me just give this last anecdotal piece. In 2009, I moved to Dresden, Germany to play American football. Guy that hired me reached out to me over Facebook Messenger. They quickly went to Google and researched Dresden, Germany, and quickly saw that, it's known for being firebombed during the war, but there wasn't anything else. And when I got to Germany, Twitter was kind of taking off at the time. They barely used Facebook. They used something called StudiVZ, which was Germany's version of Facebook. And let's face it, a lot of these big tech companies started in America, right? And so even in the last 17 years, it's gone from like music was 3 years behind when I got to Dresden. Style, clothes were 3 or 4 years behind. That was the amount of time that it took for trends to make it over there. And today it's instant because of all of it. And so the world has changed. And I think that, Europe that's just an example of like, that's where it was less than 2 decades ago for the average citizen. And, that then applies to how the sports organizations were functioning and running. and now it's a global landscape, and they're all figuring out, okay, how do we take advantage of that? I live in Berlin. I'm 10 minutes away from Olympic Stadium by bike where Hertha plays. I'm a member now of the Hertha club. I go to matches, and you're like I now can kind of socially go on and track what's going on with Hertha, but I couldn't 4 years ago when like they weren't doing as good of a job, and so you know like I just got an app update from my Hertha app saying like, hey, here's what's to expect in the match tomorrow. So like you've got a very old 110-year organization that does things a very specific way, but they're starting to make progress in bringing social into the fold and break out of just the way things have been done in the past. And that's human nature. That's human nature.
Very well put. Very well put. Well, man, as we look to wrap up here, just to give people actual context, I mean, how many, either maybe a combination of the amount of owners and deals that you've seen in the past year, what would that number be from an investment standpoint in this asset class?
Yeah, I think that I have meaningfully looked at, and by that I mean been in underwriting process or diligence or deeper strategic conversations around a property. And it's probably in the last year, 40 to 60. And I've reviewed or had initial conversations with team owners or investment banks or whomever it may be that brought the opportunity, probably closer to 100 to 110, meaningfully. I'd say there's probably 300 that cross the desk, general opportunities. But if you encapsulate the last 3 years, which is really when like that's what I woke up and started thinking about every day. It's probably deep looks into organizations, or probably in about 100 really deep looks at, hey, what's this opportunity all about? So that's kind of the context that I'm trying to provide my perspective from today in this conversation. And it's just one perspective, which is what it is.
Yeah, no, it appreciate the humility in that statement, but you have enough to work from. So I guess for my next question here, because people that are going to watch this, someone out there is thinking of starting either a new team, an organization, investing in one, buying one. I had a guy pitch me the other day this crazy idea of par threes played out on lakes in like the ocean, like floating par threes. So people are trying to really try and use both social media as kind of like a flywheel for growth, but they're also trying to raise capital. So I guess to put the two together, what would you say to someone out there right now from a marketing perspective is the biggest green flag for you in terms of thinking of investing or underwriting, whatever it is that they are trying to either, start from a league or team perspective or invest into?
Let me make a statement here that this is Kyle Israel's perspective. None of what I've said today is on behalf of Momentus, our family office, or anything like that, to be clear. But I'm sure, it's not. I'm sure the sentiment is shared with my team. First and foremost, at the most base level is, do you have a plan? Like, what is your plan from a marketing and social perspective at the beginning, right? Does it have a purpose beyond doing it because that's what everybody else does? Okay, so do you have a plan? Great. What's your plan? I already know that's going to iterate. I already know that's going to change, like a financial model. Financial model is a storytelling thing at the beginning of a business. It's going to evolve and iterate and change over time because there's going to be influences on that. So I get it. But do you have a plan in place? Do you recognize that this is important? I'd probably ask the question, why is it important to your organization? Well, because, we need to, create awareness in the community and market. And obviously that's how we do that, Kyle, right? And I go, okay, yeah, that's important. But what's the next step of that? How's that going to, like, what initiatives, what milestones, what KPIs can you put to track behind your marketing efforts to go that this is going to be, what we anticipate it being for us? So like, have the plan, understand the value of social and marketing generally as a part of standing up your organization is one of the first questions that I would ask. And also recognize that typically on the other side of the table, somebody like myself is very amenable to knowing like, this is fluid. We get it. How can we help you? That's cool. Like, but if you're just going to come to me and say, well, we're going to be on Instagram and we're going to be on TikTok and, we'll have some stuff on Facebook and, those types of elements, then I would say, okay, you're missing the mark here from the beginning. And then I would go, in an ideal world, when I review your financial performa, I'm going to see like that you've started to think about how social starts falling in that revenue category up there rather than being down below in the expense category. right? And so when you're starting the team, if you can pair the social strategy that you're deploying with a real intent to have that start driving revenue for your organization and that showing up in the financial model, whether it works out that way or not, at least I know that you're seeing those two worlds.
Man, people would pay for this sort of information. That is a great. I know that's the Kyle Israel take, but that is a phenomenal take. I again, just credit where credit's due. I'll never forget it. And I'm still nascent, I guess, to a degree, but I was very nascent a few years ago in this space. And one of the cool things that has just been awesome developing a working relationship, anyways, with Kirby Porter over at Unrivaled is that 2 years ago when I sat down with her, we were talking about the newsletter and how we wanted to attack fans, and attack is not the right word there, but how we wanted to reach fans and give them a special experience. She had this idea of like the fangirls of Unrivaled from like the very beginning. Like they understood how they were going to create authentic conversation online and how that was going to then factor into inventory that brands, depending on which conversation they wanted to be inserted into, could be inserted. And I just want to follow up because I think it's a phenomenal point from your perspective. And we've seen it play out with a league that is probably going to be worth $500 million, as of probably the next year or so. So
They're doing an incredible job. You guys do an incredible job with them. I mean, my eyeballs have been glued, to the television over the last couple of weeks and in the playoffs, like to see, obviously I'm in Germany all the time and I don't watch like live television and sports mostly. I'm typically watching, the next day. Candidly, I follow Unrivaled and see them everywhere. We looked at their opportunity a couple years ago. We weren't in position at the time to move forward. I sometimes, often, a lot lately, really wish that we could have and would have, and that was nothing against Unrivaled at all. But then I saw him like on TV here when I walked into my dad's house and my family watching it. And I was like, wait, you guys know about Unrivaled? And so like it blew my mind. Credit to Kirby, credit to their team and putting a product on the court that, people want to watch, that's exciting. I'm not sure I agree with a game ending on a free throw, but that's a conversation for another time.
I think that's the point. They're clearly doing their job.
Yeah.
As we can hear, but that's great, man. Well, I don't want to take too much more of our time. For those that are watching the long form podcast of this, I will give a fair warning that this is going to be a public endorsement of Athletiverse. I have to say that, but for folks that are out there, you're, I think, an incredible visionary and operator in the space, and you continue to get better in both of those categories every single day, which is just such a rare thing. But you're also a phenomenal person whose time is extremely highly valued, and you give so much of it to myself and our company, which I infinitely grateful for. When you thought about being an advisor for our company specifically and our mission and how we think about wanting to do things in the future, what stood out to you in terms of, wow, this is what makes Athletiverse special? Like, yes, they do things, they can deliver things that certainly other people can. But what makes us special? Even for me, like I'm constantly trying to get better at communicating and storytelling, and that's a never ending battle, which I just love to play it because it's just fun. But it oftentimes, like, if you want to know who you truly are, you ask your friends, right? And they tell you. I guess in a similar way, I'd love to know what makes what we're doing, special to you.
Well, I think it starts with you, Tom. I think it starts with your co-founder, Brian. The two of you have set an incredible foundation. I also think that it's very unique to find, what stood out to me is that, for somebody that are, so early in your career, generally speaking, you were very much thinking around the corner and you kind of had this innate understanding of what was happening in the marketplace. So I continued to build a relationship with you because you're a great guy, but I was just learning and consuming so much information from you on a pretty regular and consistent basis that was shaping how I thought about the work I was doing every day. That goes even into the underwriting side of the work that I'm doing every day, right? And really understanding what the potential of an organization is. And I think that's what's really one of the other special elements of Athletiverse is not, to your point, delivering only the agency services that, others can go out and find. But number one, it's what you and your team bring in relation to how you're thinking about what's moving in the market. Number two, it's the intersection of that with the explosion of AI and thinking about how do you incorporate IP and SaaS products that are leveraging AI to do incredible things for sports organizations. Like, you all are very much thinking through how do we provide a product or a service to a sports property that is going to be meaningful and drive change and growth rather than just waking up every day and checking a box of a scope of work, right? Like you, you do that well and fantastic. And that's where you started and what provided you with the early success in the platform. But you're also helping sports property owners, and I've been on calls where you do this, think about what they're doing right now and what they could be doing in the future. That comes back to technology, that comes back to revenue creation. Like, I think a lot of marketing agencies, and there's some incredible ones out there doing incredible work, are often thinking about executing on what's known and what's been successful. And you guys are thinking about where is the puck going? What do we have to do now to ensure that we stay competitive and our clients stay competitive in the future? It's those elements. And and then ultimately kind of, knowing under the hood a little bit what you're thinking, like how that compounds into other parts of organizations in the future outside of marketing, but collaborating with marketing at the same time. Those are the things that stick out. But I think it starts with you, Dom. I think it starts with your partner, Brian, who happens to be your father, which is an incredibly unique dynamic that I think is incredibly awesome. And your willingness to talk about it, right? You built an incredible following across your social channels because you're providing value to the ecosystem, and you're very much willing to provide educational, valuable perspective that people can take and use and apply nearly instantly to whatever it is that they're doing. And so I think, those are some of the big things that differentiate Athletiverse, and will continue to do so in the future.
Well, man, I appreciate that. From the bottom of all of our hearts, I really, really appreciate that. And it's good to hear, because I think, as you experience it every day, as you grow, there is this gravity, maybe an inertia that you're fighting. Maybe actually entropy is probably the best word. You're fighting local entropy that is trying to make you more institutional. It's trying to help you, continue to just look at, what's proven out there. Again, to your point, sports is a copycat industry. Absolutely not in a bad way either. I think there's a reason, things are successful in different areas. But to your point, hearing that what makes us special initially is just the willingness to try and figure out where the puck is going. Is just like kind of the entrepreneurial spirit I think we have to continue to always try and operate from, and instill within not just our team members, but our customers. So I really appreciate the time, man. As we wrap here, where can people find you?
You can find me on, first of all, you can reach out to me at kisrael@magnoliahillpartners.com if you're a sports property or a service provider, a subject matter expert in the asset class. Always love to connect. I wanted to add to quickly, your last question. I think one of the things that you've figured out that is additive for Athletiverse in a meaningful way, and to any listener listening to this right now, like, sports at the end of the day it's a human business. It is your ability and willingness and desire and want to connect with other humans, build intentional organic relationships. That's how deals are made. That's how big transactions are made. When you see a headline that X team just exited for $8 billion, the relationships behind that transaction are ultimately what made it happen. And I think you all do a very good job intentionally understanding the value of building relationships and adding value to other people. I have one thing in life that I kind of live by in the business world, that no matter what happens, I know that every day I wake up, I can add value somewhere. And you guys do a good job of that. So you can find me at my email if you're one of those three categories. I have a really obnoxious handle on Instagram at the Kyle Israel.
That was before he realized his hands were too small, folks, to be a quarterback in the NFL, by the way.
Yeah, that's exactly when it came about. So feel free to reach out to me on social. Obviously, LinkedIn is a great place. I now have Claude working for me. I candidly get a lot of LinkedIn messages. So if you're listening and you've messaged me on LinkedIn and I haven't responded, I apologize, but Claude is helping me kind of organize that right now. But LinkedIn is a good place as well.
Amazing, man. Thank you.